Welcome to each of you. Thank you for being here. And we'll begin by kicking it off to Dr. Emily Salih, Parks Vice Provost, to share just a bit about the Faculty Center for Innovation and to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Erica. I also want to thank the entire FCI team, including Faculty Director Dr. Amber Daly-Hebert and Dr. Jamie Ells, for your leadership. Our faculty are committed to learning, development, and innovating their practice. In short, our faculty, all of you, inspire Park students because you yourselves walk the walk of continuous learning. I also wish to thank Katie Worth for her coordination and support of this event each year, and for all her support of all FCI's programs. Finally, I want to thank other members who are with us today, showing their support. I see some of our academic deans. Provost Myers is here with us. Dr. Andrew Schaffner is here. Actually, let's call him Colonel Schaffner for the purposes of today. I'm actually participating from his office due to a technical challenge. And we also have President Smead with us on today. And I'm grateful for the support of the university towards these efforts to support faculty in doing their best work with Park students. There's no more important work than the work that you do. I'm so excited today to be a co-learner with you as we head into our keynote presentation. And it's my honor to introduce Dr. John Hagen. And I'm not sure, do we have a next slide? Awesome, thank you. Dr. John Hagen is a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. He teaches international security studies for the U.S. Air Command and Staff College's online master's program. He's a certified master instructor for the U.S. Air Force and has taught in residence and online courses for both undergraduate and graduate levels of professional military education. He entered the Air Force as an ICBM launch officer, and his 28-year career has included assignments as a course director in warfare studies at the Air Command and Staff College, as an assistant professor of international relations at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and as military advisor to the UN Assistance Mission in Iraq. He previously taught courses in instructional program design for Park University's Masters of Education in Leading Adult and Organizational Learning. Dr. Hagen serves as co-leader of the Faculty Development Group for the Partnership for Peace Consortium that conducts faculty development programs in NATO partner countries as part of the Defense Education Enhancement Program. He has been leading faculty development teams for DEEP since 2017 and has worked with military institutions in Armenia, Colombia, Mauritania, Tunisia, and Uzbekistan. He has also led faculty development programs in military institutions in Niger, Chad, and Mozambique. Dr. Hagen received his PhD in international relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. He currently lives with his spouse in Portugal. We are grateful to Dr. Hagen for helping us advance our knowledge and strategies to support military-connected students at Park in all modalities. Dr. Hagen, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Emily. I really do appreciate being here, and thank you to the Faculty Center for Innovation for including me in this conference. You know, when Erica and Amber first approached me about speaking at this conference, I was like, yes. I mean, I've got so many things I'd love to share. So my challenge was actually narrowing that down. I've had a real opportunity over 3 decades to work in higher education, both in the military and on the civilian side. So kind of building off of what Erica was saying earlier about meeting of worlds, I feel like I've had a foot in both of those worlds. And I would say it's not just military and civilian higher ed, but it's military higher ed and civilian higher ed. And based on my experiences, that's what I kind of want to share today. Given that this conference is about supporting our military students, I want to take a more systemic approach. I know our panel later on today is going to do some great work on examining individual issues, but I want to think about what military education is, what it does, what it doesn't do, and what the implications of that are for you as Park University students with military students in your class, or Park University instructors with military students in your classroom. This keynote actually allows me to continue a conversation I just had 2 days ago with my colleagues in my faculty development group, which were forever looking at this issue of critical thinking, active learning, diverse perspective in military institutions, and how we help them develop their students, but also recognizing what the limitations are in those institutions as well. And I think that's the connection I'm going to be making today to Park University. And I want to start with thinking about a question a mechanics instructor at the Tunisian Naval Academy was asking me a few years ago. We were there doing a workshop on critical thinking. And her question to me was, how do we exactly develop diverse perspective in a group of cadets who are almost all from the same kind of background, same desires, and are in an institution that is designed to help produce conformity or at least uniformity in how teaching occurs? Which I think is a really good question, and it kind of gets at kind of the limitations, I think, of military education. I want to build off of that question and make a more strategic argument about the limitations of military education are and what that means for Park University. I have come to the conclusion over 3 decades, it's my personal conclusion, I can support it a little bit, that there are just certain things that military education can do, and there's certain things it can't do. But the good thing is, there's institutions like Park University, civilian institutions that can round out our military students' perspectives and give them something that they're not going to get from their military education. Before I go further, I am retired, but I should make a disclaimer. These are my own personal views. They're not the views of the US Air Force or NATO or any other government agencies. So just want to make sure that's clear. So I want to make an argument, checking my notes here. First, I want to make a concise overview. I want to make my argument in 3 parts. I want to give you a concise overview of what military education is, what it does, how it operates on a very general scale, to kind of set up a claim about what military education can and what it can't do. And I think that's important to look at. Most people don't realize it, but the Department of Defense is the largest educational organization in the world. It has over 3 million people, personnel in it, who are taking courses and programs from when they enter, sometimes late in their teen years, all the way through to when they leave in their 50s. So we have this group of students that you are getting in who already have been through an educational system or in part of a different educational system than Park. And what I want to look at today is what that means for you as Park instructors. So we'll first develop that educational system, and then I'll make my primary claim that the military has struggles with providing opportunities for developing diverse perspective and for intellectual risk-taking. These are competencies that are badly needed, but they don't seem to be produced purposefully. They seem to be more the exception than the rule in military education. So establishing that claim, we can then move into, okay, so what does this mean for us at Park University? How can we support our students? I want to begin with a picture, if you don't mind. Let me bring this up on the screen. So this is back from my days in the late 80s. This is a training environment for the military. It is training being conducted in a simulator used for missile launch officers. In the image, the student is seated at the console. They have their checklists in front of them. They have 3 instructors standing around them, observing their behavior, seeing how they perform, and making sure that the student is performing according to task. It is what could be concisely summarized as read the step, do the step, and eat the banana. And this is kind of a baseline approach to how training is done in the military, very behavioralist. And while it's training, it's not education, it definitely informs how the military trains, also informs how it educates. Behind every military course and program, there's a set of learning objectives that are established what the student will know upon completion of learning and what they will be able to do upon the completion of that learning. Now, of course, we all have learning objectives in our courses, in our civilian courses, but the nature of military learning objectives tend to be more about the what and the how, what they need to know, how they need to perform. The why very rarely comes in, and when it does come in, it comes in more as a motivating factor for the student knowing the what and the how. What the military doesn't allow too much for is the why of why does this have to occur this way? Why is this even necessary? It's just not the nature of it. So our military students tend not to think too much introspectively about, well, why do I need to learn this? What does this mean going forward? Now, this image is of junior officers. These are lieutenants, probably in the first couple years of their training. But this is part of a larger educational system in the military. And this is a very, I can bring up the next slide here. This is a very simplistic model, but it is of the military training and education system. It's meant to represent all services, enlisted and officers. So it's going to be very general, but the basics of it are going to be the same for every service. Everyone begins the military at some sort of a sessions training, enlisted basic training, officer sessions training. That could be basic training at Lackland, that could be ROTC, that could be the Naval Academy. We all come in through some sort of a sessions training. And while that provides basic competencies, its primary purpose is inculcating military values and culture into the individual. It is more conformist of teaching them what they need to know, how to be part of the system. Now, upon completion of that training, individuals enter the service and they progress up two different tracks. First, they progress up a training track, which is basically their functional skills. Are they going to be a cook? Are they going to be a pilot? Are they going to be a security guard? Are they going to be an infantry officer, an aircraft mechanic? They will proceed up a functional training cycle of some sort, which will give them their basic occupational skills, moving on to advanced occupational skills as they move further up, and then sometimes the opportunity for career broadening skills, crossing over to another career field. And that's the training side. On the educational side is what we call professional military education. And for enlisted and for officers, there are schools. Some go for a few weeks. Some go for up to 9 months if you're going in residence for war college or staff college. But this is the schools where they're learning the broader issues such as leadership, communications, or strategic thinking. Now, as a concept, professional military education is quite remarkable. It provides just-in-time knowledge and education to military as they're moving into progressively more ambitious positions. So it's giving them the information they need to know when they need to know it. But because technical competency is the focus of the earlier part of the career for military students, they don't get a whole lot of critical thinking opportunities until they get into the more advanced senior or executive levels of PME, professional military education. Now, there is a third track in there in the center. All the services maintain their own in-house degree programs. Examples of that would be Community College of the Air Force, Naval Postgraduate School. You can get degrees. I taught the military, the master's program for the Air Command and Staff College. Also, in addition to that, universities like Park will accept courses, credits from these degree programs or also from PME as well, which means that our students sometimes might be thinking, oh, I got 3 credits for this for my captain's course. That counts towards my degree at Park. There might be a view of, okay, the training or the education might be the same, that the equivalency of the transition of the credits means there'll be an equivalency in experience. But overall, we're looking at a very well-funded and I'd say holistic educational system that all of our students, our military students and our veterans, have gone through or are going through at the moment. Now, the red line is my kind of speculation based on the average age of Park students of where Park students are at in their military educational cycle or a military educational progress when they enter Park University. And this is something actually to ask your students. I would strongly recommend, if you don't already, asking them where they're at in their skills training, where they're at in their PME. Are they due to do NCO Academy, Advanced NCO Academy? Do they still have to do their skill levels at a certain part on their training? And connecting where you can, where appropriate, to the courses that they're taking with you at Park University. Realizing that there are two different educational systems your students are operating in, the military system and the civilian system. I would argue that the military educational system is characterized or is characterized by the same characteristics of military operations overall. And I wanted to highlight 4 characteristics that I think are innate to military operations and to military instruction, and consider their implications for students coming into Park. First of all military instruction is highly collective. Lots of group problems, lots of group-based learning, and a fair amount of social conformity. It is not uncommon, in fact, it's quite common, that the group that you train with are the people that you dine with, or actually the people that you're living with at the time, because you're all deployed to do your training to a certain school. So there's a strong amount of social conformity, and there's a real sense of cohesiveness with your teams. I'm still in touch with people who I went through seminars for training years ago, or even decades ago. On top of that, military training, military education is grounded in authoritative guidance. Doctrine, regulations, technical orders. Even if you think about it, our acronyms that we use are oftentimes mnemonics for specific actions to be taken in a specific order. For instance, if you were trying to clear a weapon back in the day, the acronym was SPORTS for the actions you would take to clear the weapon. If you were in planning, MATICAP was the acronym used for that. So we tend to, in military training and military education, always go back to this authoritative guidance. It's not directive, but it is considered the primary sources of education or the primary best practices that we should be pursuing or using or referencing as we're trying to solve problems. Military education a lot of times is essentially about problem solving. Here is the solution and the method to use. Go ahead and apply it out to a particular problem. The third issue is the one that most people are most commonly familiar with, and that's the hierarchical organizational culture. We tend to give in the military great deference to rank. It is a huge, and I didn't realize it until I transitioned out of the military, but being of a higher rank than your students naturally tend to defer to you on your ideas. They don't challenge you as much. I will say when I was at UMass Amherst, I was commanding an ROTC unit there and was teaching my cadets. I retired from there, and that fall I moved over to the Commonwealth Honors College to teach as a civilian professor. And it was a dramatically different dynamic between teaching military students as a military officer versus teaching civilian students as a civilian professor. Your students are probably dealing with the same issues when they come into your classes. There is a tendency to overly defer, I think, to the professor, because not all military professors are going to tolerate questioning or challenging of their positions. And finally, I want to bring up this idea of the up or out career progression. In the military, in general, not always, the expectation is that you get promoted, and at a certain point, if you've not gotten promoted, it's time to leave the military. That up or out progression, well, promotion is based on performance, and performance includes your progression or your success of completing your training. And therefore, there is a mindset that I have to finish this training or I'm not going to get promoted. So the emphasis sometimes can shift from learning the material to getting the certificate, achieving the degree so that you can move forward. Now, these four characteristics all contribute to a unique character that produces disciplined, goal-oriented learners who excel in a structured environment. At the same time, these characteristics establish conditions in a learning environment that are less than optimal for developing diverse perspectives for critically analyzing problems. Collectivism can lead to conformity or to groupthink. People will figure out what the best answer is or the dominant answer, and they'll tend to coalesce around that very quickly without necessarily challenging it. Given the established doctrine or the authoritative guidance of the hierarchy, presenting new ideas and challenging perspectives is far more risky than just applying what is perceived to be the book answer. So military will tend to resort back to, well, what do I already know that worked? Or what does the doctrine say? And that's the answer I'm going to give. And finally, success is often measured solely by the achievement of the objective. Sounds good, but not always in presenting the ideas that might challenge the objective, that diverse perspective or that critical thought of, well, why is that important for me to do? This results in three, I think, challenges in military education. In military education, and I'm speaking in general, obviously, not specifics, military students tend to be risk averse when it comes to challenging accepted ideas. Doesn't mean there's not banter in the classroom and back and forth. But when it comes to actually thinking about challenging the system or challenging the ideas that are being learned, there's less of that. There also tends to be an over-reliance on predetermined solutions. What does the doctrine say to do it? What is the model that we used before? Even when given new models, the tendency is to lapse back to what you already comfortably know. And finally, there really is a lack of opportunity for critical thinking at the lower ranks. And really, it's not until you get into the war college level that you begin, or the staff college or the master's courses, that you get into the real critical thinking. Now, you could argue it's more important for junior enlisted or junior officers to focus on basic skills and knowledge, and that it's the senior leaders who need to be thinking critically. But that's where my tree analogy comes in from the title of my presentation. So the profile of the tree, a full-grown tree, is a product of everything that's pushed on it over its growth and its maturity. Where the sun came in at it, how the wind blew, maybe where the rain falls. And it's not reasonable to expect that the tree that has grown under one profile for 10 or 15 years can suddenly grow straight when finally the conditions change. And I think senior leaders in the military are like trees. We're influenced by decades of a particular approach. And when it comes to finally being able to do critical thinking, we just don't always have those skills to do that. Now, that's not to say that military leaders are incapable of critical thinking or considering diverse perspectives. I'm just saying the system is not designed to nurture those capabilities. And these limitations are known in the military. This is probably the most common thing we discuss in my faculty development group. And I'd like to present a couple examples from colleagues of mine who have been looking at this very issue. This is my overlay to just reinforce my point. So this was a paper written by a colleague of mine, Megan Hennessy. She just got announced as the new provost at the Marine Corps University. Prior to this, she was teaching at the Army War College, and her and some colleagues did a study on problem-based learning at the War College. Now, the War College is colonels. They've been in the military for at least 20, 25 years, and they are expected, if they're in residence at the War College, that they'll be proceeding on maybe to the general rank at some point. In this problem set, or in this exercise, the students were given a semester of new innovative ideas to apply for this problem-based learning model or exercise. But at the end of it, what they were finding was there was real gaps in the students' causal logic and literacy. They were uncomfortable with the ambiguity. Even though they were given new models, they went back to the old frameworks that they were most used to. And that there was also real lack of inclusive collaboration of different or outside perspectives. They tended to coalesce very quickly around one idea and just went with that. So that was my American colleague. My Armenian colleague, he's a colonel in the Armenian army, was kind of looking at the same thing, only he was looking at a very practical issue of why did Armenia lose the 2022 war to Azerbaijan? And his big findings, or at least his big arguments, was there was a real lack of innovation in the Armenian military educational system. And the Armenian solution, when doctrine didn't work, was just to use it even more. So if 2 didn't work, then we'll do it 4 times as hard. Maybe that will. So for the Armenians, they were reflecting the exact same thing that Megan Hennessy was seeing at the War College, this over-reliance on doctrine and not doing the critical thinking about what it meant, what its implications were, and what would be alternative perspectives to look at. This is not a new problem. And I would say it's just an enduring feature. I wouldn't even call it a problem. But one of the first books I remember reading on this issue was Barbara Tuchman's Guns of August, from examining the origins of World War I. And her basic thesis of leadership's failure to consider consequences of actions and inability to justify plans or face changing circumstances. So this is an issue that's out there. It's what I think is just innate in military education, that it just is not as able to provide the critical thinking opportunities and the diverse perspectives. So what does that mean for our military students at Park? When we think about military students coming out of a military education system that is a bit more behavioralist, a bit more cognitivist in terms of you need to know what to do, how to do it, and not necessarily always the whys. What are the big issues we should be thinking about? And I kind of narrowed it down to four areas. Now, the good thing is, I would argue that these are all areas that are relevant for all of our students. It's not just military students that need this. But I will say, I think our military students will have more challenge from this than our typical civilian students will. And the first one is the diverse perspectives. Getting that military student into a cohort where not every idea is the same. Now, it's not to say that military classes are entirely homogeneous, but oftentimes, if you can get your military student into a group of non-military, they have to often explain themselves. Like, what do you mean by that? Why are you thinking that? And it forces that military student to question or at least examine their own assumptions and implications of what they're thinking about. At the same time, they're obviously getting the diverse perspectives from their fellow classmates. One thing I think as instructors we need to be aware of when teaching military students is to back off a little bit and not, because there is so much deference to the instructor, trying to really push them to take the lead on their own learning versus just following what the instructor's guidance is going to be. The second thing is the non-detrimental failures. Because there is such an emphasis on success and excelling in learning in military education. Many of the schools I've been through had the top graduate or distinguished graduate programs where everyone was thinking about, okay, how do I get the top grade? I remember at West Point, it would drive you crazy when the cadets' biggest question was, how do I get the A? Now, I know that's the same in civilian students. So there's a question we all deal with. But I think one way we try to break out of that is providing those non-detrimental failure opportunities, whether it's games, whether it is exercises that the students don't have all the answers for and that they're going to have to just try it and maybe not succeed and then try again. And I realize that time is a real issue. And I think this is where, at least with my military students, we would just run out of time. We did not have the time to do the exercises always I'd like to do that didn't have the points. The other issue is students get highly conditioned to, if there's no points, it's not that important an issue. So it's a matter of how do you motivate them to pursue risk, even if there's no points involved in it. One thing I will say is, at least in our seminars in the military, is if you can pair them off against each other, small groups doing exercises that maybe not a competition, but definitely where they're comparative to each other, that is an opportunity to motivate risky behavior. The next thing is ambiguity. Sometimes we just have to let things be ambiguous out there. We don't always have to be overdetermined in everything that we give the students in terms of assignments. Sometimes leave things out of the assignment, let the students figure it out on their own. I always love the assignments where one group of students go in one direction and another go in an entirely opposite direction. That is a good sign of the ambiguity of giving the students a little more say on figuring out what does this assignment mean and what should we be doing to address it. And then finally, that critical thinking piece, those opportunities when we're asking them the question of what does this mean? That was my most common question on teaching international security studies at the end of the week, after everyone had gone through the readings and done everything. It was like, well, what does this exactly mean at the end of the day? What are the implications? What are the assumptions we haven't considered? Asking those open-ended questions that honestly most of the time never get given the time that they need to be given for the students to think about it and reflect on it. So what I've tried to present to you in my talk, hopefully this has been of some thought, is that there is a military education system out there. It shapes how our students think and how they learn. And it is distinct and different from the civilian education system, but it's not oppositional to it. It's just something we need to take into account when we have military students. That our military students, by the nature of the military, are very good at certain types of problems and solving problems, but there's other more gray areas that they might be good at. It's just our system, our military education system, is not designed to produce those. And finally, you all are in an amazing position to work with military students to provide those opportunities for critical thinking, for diverse perspective, for dealing with ambiguity that they're not going to get in the military, but that they need, that will be valuable to them as they go forward in their careers. So I'd be happy, I know some of this has been a little controversial, but I'd be happy to take questions or thoughts on this.
Dr. Hagen, I just want to thank you for your talk today. If not controversial, then thought-provoking. Really enjoyed the content, excited to hear what our participants' reactions are, and very excited to see how Dr. Olson-Morrison and the student instructor panel serve as ways of helping us see some of the dynamics that you've discussed. But I appreciate that you're coming from an asset-based perspective on the military student and helping us see not only challenges, but all the things that our military-connected students bring to the classroom. So thank you again for the presentation, and I'll turn it over to Erica.
Thank you, Emily and Dr. Hagen, for such a lovely start. I'd like to spend the next sort of few minutes before we go on a break before the second half of the conference responding to questions that some of you might have had during the presentation. So if you like, I'd love for you to put questions into the chat if you had them, if they came up during the conversation. But I don't mind certainly getting us started. I sort of had a question that I was thinking about as you were talking. So I teach first year writing. I teach EN 105, EN 106, and I love teaching that particular course because for all students, it can really be the beginning of critical thinking and sort of that, space to think without putting too much emphasis on the product. We're very much process, not product in Rhet Comp. So for that reason, I have a lot of love for my field. And one thing I have noticed is I have often military connected students who during their day are writing evaluations and awards and grade sheets and are living in acronyms. And then I get them, you know, from like 5 to 8 at night, and I sort of pose, you're going to write a writer's journal, you're going to read this passage, and you're going to have 500 words to sort of just share your thoughts on this passage related to education. It's pass fail. I'm much more interested in your thinking than the actual product of writing. And I find that for a lot of students who have spent the day writing very sort of straightforward, prescriptive, working within templates, it is just a very frustrating assignment. And it's sort of like, but what do you want? How do I not spend, you know, I often have students who overspend time on it, who spend 2 hours trying to get something on the page, even though it's supposed to be a writing exercise. And certainly that's not what we want from someone who is also serving in the military, working full-time, has a family. So my question is, how do we support those students in that very beginning of a transition where they're doing very one specific thing that's working well and being asked of them during the day, and then suddenly in your class, they're asked to do something completely foreign, even if it's a really low stakes writing assignment or exercise?
I think that is an excellent example because I can remember being trained in the military on how to write a paragraph. So it was very formulaic. You had a topic sentence, you had support sentences, and then you had a transition sentence to take you to the next paragraph. And I can remember writing awards or DEP awards, deployment orders, where everything was very formulaic and template driven. And what comes to mind as you were bringing that up, I think would be a great opportunity, is for them to take, let's say your student is one who's writing deployment orders all the time. Have them write a deployment order in a different way. So have them write a deployment order for their mom coming over for Thanksgiving dinner. You know, something where they take what they already know. Okay, I got a deployment order. But you're kind of giving them the freedom to be a little free about it. So, I mean, it's just kind of a thought exercise at the beginning, just off the top of my mind. But I think about all those award packages I used to have to write as an executive officer. And how it'd be so much fun to write an award for something that someone did that was completely inane and stupid. And be more creative and kind of break them out of the, okay, this is, everything has to follow the same template. But I think that's a good example as I'm thinking about it, is begin with what they already do, which is not very behavioralist, but very prescriptive. And start with that, but kind of break it up on them. I don't know if
I love, and you know, as a writing teacher, I'm already in love with the idea of playing with genre, but also introducing an element of play to the learning process, which I think is what academics often love about higher ed, is there's an element of play in thinking. That often probably is not integral to military training.
I was saying about the social cohesiveness in the units. There is very much social cohesiveness among the students, but that interaction with the instructor can be quite variable. And most, I think, military are going to assume that distance between them and the instructor, that ability to do that playful approach might not be, many military instructors would not be comfortable doing that, but you absolutely are in a position that would work.
Oh, and we have another great question here from Debbie, who says, I was wondering how military students perceive the usefulness of critical thinking versus their historic reliance on authoritative thinking, more black and white. Does this cause anxiety in the classroom or threaten their sense of comfort?
Yeah, I think that's often my speculation is there's a lot of defensiveness on that. For the student, that's some hard work. And it's not just hard work, it's scary work. Because once you start asking those questions, you're kind of going into that ambiguous gray area that people don't know. And oftentimes I would hear in my seminars, well, let's just get to the point. What is it we need to do here? No, we're going to hang out in this ambiguous gray space for a while and discuss it. And I think that's really one of the challenges of critical thinking with the military objectives, is because we give them these objectives right at the front. Know this, be able to do this, apply this model. So the students are conditioned to just do that. And even if you, and again, like in my graduate program, we did have them looking at doing some critical thinking, but it was very limited in terms of pushing the students to do it. But I would push back on the students, saying, you know, part of let them know we're doing metacognition with them. We're teaching them not just what the material is, but how to process it themselves. I don't know if that helps any, other than me acknowledging I agree, it's a real challenge.
Debbie, do you want to add to that or jump in?
Thank you. Oh my goodness. I would love to jump in because this is what I'm going to talk about a little bit. I don't want to take up any more time for other questions, but I always think of that desensitization process in the classroom with students who are challenged by critical thinking or kind of moving away from reliance on the experts to know the answer and how to self-mastery essentially. And I think of it like touching a hot plate. Like it might not be too hot, but you want to see if it's hot at first. And so you just kind of tap into it really lightly, and then gradually add more, and then gradually. So it's kind of like gradual exposure is the way that I think of into these higher level cognitive processes that can be very threatening. I mean, threatening on so many levels, but very threatening. So that's all I have to say about that.
No, I agree. I mean, it is challenging in a military classroom to argue with doctrine. Who am I, Captain so-and-so, to argue with this, you know, volumes of doctrine that was written on this? I think one way to approach this might be, and I love your idea of tapping the hot plate gently, might be having every student write a paragraph or 2 paragraphs disagreeing with me. I've just given you a presentation in class. I want you to give me 2 paragraphs. You don't have to say it in public because that might be a little too risky. Of vehemently disagreeing with me and giving your argument of why. So.
Well, and I think this gets to a point that Dan has put in the chat as well, which is, do military students defer to PERC instructors like senior military instructors? And if so, how can we overcome that and have them think more critically? So thank you, Dan, for that question as well.
Yeah, anecdotally, I would say they don't. So I was teaching for organizational adult learning at Park at the exact same time. I would teach that one on Wednesday night, and on Thursday night, I was teaching my military students for international security studies. My Park students were not shy about speaking up. And what was good, I did notice, is that the Park students who spoke up a lot at first were I think they were the civilian, at least the ones I remember were. But that kind of opened up the space for everyone else then to disagree with me as well. So that was, by the way, that was a bit of a challenge for me because I was like, wow, they're pushing back on me. So I kind of had to be like, well, that's a good thing. They're pushing back on me. They're paying that much attention. They care that much about it. So I don't know what anyone else's experience is in terms of being able to compare it, but at that time, that was something really obvious to me was I would never get pushed back. I always got sir from my military students. Not that they did what I asked, but they just didn't push back on me.
I also this one isn't necessarily a question, but I want to highlight Matt DeMayo's comment. Matt is one of our campus center directors, and while I've never met him, I have virtually worked with him many times over Pirate Patch, and he also brought us 2 of our student panelists. So Matt has just done an incredible job working with our military connected students and supporting them. But one of the things he says in his sort of comment here is that students in general have to learn their voice matters. And, you know, transitioning from military to higher ed, it's sort of like you have this moment of, well, what can I say in the higher ed context that matters? Especially when you're used to not having sort of the authoritative position. What can we do in our classrooms to sort of let students know that, no, your voice does matter. I want to hear what you think, and it has real impact potentially on your field or what you choose to study?
You know what, this might not directly answer that question, but I think your military students are real assets in your classroom. In that, as I said in my presentation, they are already trained to work in groups and to lead problem solving groups. So if you're doing a problem-based learning exercise or any sort of group work, you kind of know if there's a military student in that group, it's going to happen. Things are going to get done in general. I mean, obviously there's a range of individuals out there, but they're trained to do that. But I don't know if that's limited just to military students of making sure their voice matters. I think that's more of a general issue. I don't think military students, at least my impression is, they don't enter it thinking their voices don't matter. If anything, they come in with a host of experiences that they can share to the class, and that seem to be respected by their civilian peers. Again, this is all anecdotal just from my own teaching. So
I think we have time for maybe one more conversation. I want to just also thank Danny Berger for your perspective here on the chat. This is one we talked about certainly leading up to the conference, about just how what works in one context does not work in another. And this is a beautiful example of just why some things function in the military, but not sort of in higher ed. Oh, Matt, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to share a story real quick. One day I had a husband-wife military couple in front of me, and the local English professor was also in the office with us at the time. And I said to them, look, one of the things you got to realize is our professors teach the same courses term over term over term, year over year over year. And when it comes to picking topics for your papers or assignments or whatever it is, there's always sort of a general list you can pick from, but don't be afraid to pick something that's not on that list. And my rationale for saying this was, they see the same stuff term over term over term, and it becomes wah, wah, wah. And the professor turned and looked at me and says, where did you learn that? And I just said, common sense, because you get new material to a professor, maybe it's on a topic they don't really have a lot of information on, so it's interesting to them. They may learn something, and you'll probably get a better grade on it. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Matt. And just thanks for being here and your help with this conference. And I also, before we wrap this up, I think we'll have time to give everyone a nice 5-minute break. But I want to thank Greg, too, in the chat, who offered a really useful and universally applicable approach to having students in general think more critically. So thank you for that, Greg. And if anyone else take time to really read through the chat, there's some really phenomenal advice here. John, I don't know how to thank you enough for your time today and your expertise and what you've shared with us. I think so often we sort of meet a student where they are, and we don't realize sort of the journey that they've been on to get here and how that impacts their learning. And just because of who we are as a university and our student body, this is really critical information. And thank you for your time, your expertise, and also just your teaching at Park. We've been very lucky to have you.
Well, I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I just want to leave, though, with that one thing I started the presentation with. It is a great way to build rapport with your military students, and it's also valuable for understanding opportunities for learning if you ask them where they're at in their military educational journey as they're taking your course. You might discover that, oh, they're about ready to start a course that's very similar to what you're teaching already. So you might get a 2-for-1 on that. So I would not pass up on that opportunity.
Well, thank you so much. That's all we have time for the keynote, but please hang around. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. And on the other side of that break, we will hear from Dr. Deborah Olson Morrison, who I'm sure many of us are just excited to see this morning, to discuss her research on and experience with resilience in the classroom. And that's sort of applicable to all our students, not just our military connected students. And we will follow that with a student instructor panel that I am just so excited about. So take a minute, grab a drink, some lunch even, depending on your time zone. And feel free to keep the conversation going in the chat. I hope this is a whole side world of thinking and connection that continues to happen. So a huge thank you, and we'll be back here in 5 minutes. Enjoy.